What happens when one of Britain's most beloved music legends comes face to face with a host determined to dig into the darkest corners of his past? You won't believe what unfolds when Sir Tom Jones sits down for what was supposed to be a celebration of his incredible career, only to find himself under attack from Kaye Adams in the most explosive confrontation Loose Women has ever witnessed. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two powerhouses clash in spectacular fashion. Last night's episode of Loose Women was meant to be a triumphant return for the Welsh icon, but instead became a battleground that ended with security being called and one of music's greatest legends storming off set in absolute fury. This is the complete breakdown of how it all went so devastatingly wrong. The atmosphere in the studio was electric, as Sir Tom Jones made his entrance to thunderous applause from the live audience. At 83 years old, the voice that had captivated generations still commanded respect, and his presence immediately lifted the energy in the room. Dressed in his signature black outfit, with that unmistakable silver hair perfectly styled, Tom seemed genuinely pleased to be there, flashing that famous smile and waving to fans who had been waiting hours to see their hero. Kaye Adams, however, had other plans entirely. From the moment the cameras started rolling, there was something different in her demeanor. Where the other panelists, Ruth Langsford, Janet Street Porter, and Colleen Nolan, were clearly starstruck and eager to hear about Tom's latest projects, Kaye's questions had an edge that immediately put everyone on alert. "Sir Tom, wonderful to have you here," Kaye began, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Now, you've had an incredible career spanning over 6 decades, but there are aspects of your personal life that have always been, shall we say, controversial. Don't you think it's time you addressed some of the elephant in the room?" The other panelists exchanged uncomfortable glances. This wasn't the warm welcome they'd planned. Tom, seasoned professional that he was, maintained his composure, but you could see a flicker of confusion cross his face. "Well, Kaye, I'm here to talk about my music, my new album, and connect with the fans," Tom replied diplomatically, his Welsh accent still as rich as ever. "I've always been open about my life, the good and the challenging parts." But Kaye wasn't satisfied with diplomacy. She leaned forward, her voice taking on a prosecutorial tone that made the studio audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Open? Really? Because there are stories, Tom. Stories about your behavior toward women throughout your career that paint a very different picture from the charming gentleman we see today." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ruth Langsford tried to interject with a laugh. "Kaye, perhaps we should talk about Tom's amazing new material." But Kaye cut her off with a sharp look. "No, Ruth. I think our viewers deserve to hear about this. Sir Tom, you've faced multiple allegations over the years about inappropriate conduct with female fans and industry professionals. How do you reconcile your public image with these persistent rumors?" Tom's jaw tightened visibly. The easy smile that had charmed millions was nowhere to be seen now, replaced by a steely expression that showed this was a man not used to being ambushed on live television. "Now hold on just a minute," Tom said, his voice carrying a warning tone that anyone who knew him would recognize. "I came here in good faith to talk about my music and my career. I didn't come here to be attacked with unsubstantiated gossip and rumors." The studio audience was dead silent now, sensing the tension crackling between host and guest. Cameramen adjusted their positions to capture every micro-expression, knowing they were witnessing television gold, even if it was uncomfortable gold. Kaye, emboldened by Tom's obvious discomfort, pressed on relentlessly. "Unsubstantiated? There have been multiple women who've come forward over the years with similar stories about your conduct backstage, in hotels, at recording sessions. Are all of these women lying, Tom?" "I'm not going to dignify that with a response," Tom shot back, his famous temper beginning to surface. "You're trying to destroy a man's reputation based on hearsay and tabloid nonsense. This is beneath you, Kaye, and, frankly, it's beneath this show." But Kaye Adams was just getting started. And what happened next would escalate this confrontation beyond anything anyone in that studio could have imagined. Ignoring the visible discomfort of her fellow panelists and the increasingly hostile body language from her guest, Kaye reached into a folder beside her chair and pulled out what appeared to be printed documents. The rustling of papers was audible through the studio microphones, creating an ominous soundtrack to what was about to unfold. Actually, Tom, I have some very specific details here, Kaye announced with a smugness that made even the production crew wince behind their cameras. Linda Martinez, a backup singer from your 1987 tour, claims you cornered her in a hotel elevator in Las Vegas and made unwanted advances. Sarah Thompson, a journalist from Music Weekly, says you made inappropriate comments during an interview in 1995. These aren't just random accusations, Tom. These are documented incidents with dates, locations, and witnesses. The color drained from Tom Jones's face, not from guilt, but from pure rage at what was clearly an orchestrated ambush. His hands, those same hands that had commanded stages around the world, clenched into fists on the table. "You absolute bloody cow," Tom exploded, his Welsh accent thickening with fury. "How dare you ambush me with this garbage? You've dragged me here under false pretenses to humiliate me with lies and fabricated stories. This is character assassination, pure and simple." The studio audience gasped collectively. Several members of the production crew could be seen frantically gesturing to each other, clearly unprepared for this level of confrontation. Janet Street Porter sat with her mouth agape, while Colleen Nolan looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Kaye, however, was relishing every second of Tom's discomfort. "So you're saying Linda Martinez is a liar? That Sarah Thompson fabricated her story? These women put their reputations on the line to speak their truth, and you're dismissing them as liars?" "I'm saying you're a vindictive harpy who's using innocent people's names to destroy me," Tom roared, his voice carrying that same power that had filled concert halls for decades. "You don't know these women, you haven't verified anything, and you sure as hell don't care about the truth." Ruth Langsford made another desperate attempt to restore some civility to the proceedings. "Perhaps we should take a quick break and—" "No." Tom slammed his hand on the table so hard that the water glasses jumped. "I want everyone to see what kind of person Kaye Adams really island. This woman invited me here to promote my new work, and instead she's trying to destroy my reputation with tabloid trash." Kaye's eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction. She had Tom exactly where she wanted him, angry, defensive, and looking like a man with something to hide. The truth often makes people angry, doesn't it, Tom? Especially when they've spent decades hiding behind their fame and fortune while their victims suffered in silence. "Victims?" Tom's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than his previous shouting. "You want to talk about victims, Kaye? How about the victim of your pathetic attempt at journalism? How about the families of these women you're exploiting for your sick little game?" The tension in the studio was now suffocating. Camera operators continued filming, knowing they were capturing television history, even as they wondered if they should intervene. The live audience sat in stunned silence, many covering their mouths in shock at the language and accusations flying across the panel desk. Kaye leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smirk. "I'm simply asking the questions that need to be asked, Tom. The questions that other interviewers have been too intimidated or too starstruck to pursue. Someone needs to hold you accountable." "Accountable?" Tom laughed, but it was a bitter, dangerous sound. "You wouldn't know accountability if it bit you on your sanctimonious arse. You're a failed journalist who's turned into a professional shit-stirrer, and everyone in this building knows it." The other panelists were now openly uncomfortable, with Janet Street Porter actually covering her face with her hands. Production assistants could be seen hovering at the edges of the set, clearly receiving instructions through their headsets about whether to cut to commercial or let this nuclear meltdown continue. But Kaye Adams was far from finished with her assault, and what she said next would push Sir Tom Jones completely over the edge. "You know what, Tom?" Kaye said, her voice dripping with venom as she shuffled through more papers. "I've also been in contact with your late wife Linda's family. They've shared some very interesting stories about how you treated her during your marriage. The affairs, the public humiliation, the way you flaunted your infidelities while she suffered at home raising your son. Tell me, how does it feel to know that even your own family thinks you're a selfish, narcissistic predator?" The studio fell into a deathly silence. Even the camera operators stopped moving. Kaye Adams had just crossed a line that no decent person would ever cross, attacking a man's deceased wife on live television. Tom Jones went completely still. The rage that had been building throughout the interview transformed into something far more dangerous. A cold, controlled fury that made everyone in the studio instinctively step back. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of 6 decades of experience dealing with people who thought they could destroy him. "You evil, pathetic excuse for a human being," Tom said, each word carefully measured and devastating. "My wife Linda was a saint who put up with more than any woman should have to, and she's been dead for 7 years. But you're so desperate for ratings, so hungry for relevance, that you'll desecrate her memory for your sick little show." Tom slowly stood up from his chair, his full height and presence commanding the entire studio. "I've dealt with real journalists, Kaye. I've sat with professionals who ask tough questions with dignity and respect. You're not a journalist. You're a bottom-feeding vulture who gets off on other people's pain." Kaye tried to interrupt, but Tom's voice rose to drown her out completely. "No, you've had your fun. Now it's my turn to speak. You want to know about accountability? Let's talk about your accountability. You ambushed me here today with lies, half-truths, and fabricated stories. You exploited women's names without their permission to try to destroy me. And now you've dragged my dead wife into your gutter, because you're too bloody incompetent to conduct a real interview." The other panelists were frozen in their seats, unable to process what they were witnessing. Ruth Langsford had tears in her eyes. Whether from embarrassment or genuine emotion was unclear. Janet Street Porter looked like she wanted to crawl under the desk, while Colleen Nolan sat motionless, staring at Kaye Adams with undisguised disgust. Tom began removing his microphone with deliberate, controlled movements. "You know what the real tragedy is, Kaye? You had the chance to interview a legend. You could have asked about my music, my career, the people I've worked with, the places I've been. Instead, you chose to wallow in the sewers of tabloid journalism because that's all you're capable of." "Tom, please sit down," Kaye tried weakly, but the authority had completely drained from her voice. She could see that she had pushed too far, and now she was facing the consequences of her cruelty. "Sit down?" Tom laughed, but there was no humor in it whatsoever. "I wouldn't sit in the same room as you for another second. You're a disgrace to your profession, a disgrace to this show, and frankly, you're a disgrace to basic human decency." He tossed his microphone onto the table with enough force to make everyone jump. "And for the record, since you seem so interested in the truth, every woman I've ever been with has been a consenting adult who knew exactly what they were getting into. I've never forced myself on anyone, never cornered anyone, and never made unwanted advances. But you wouldn't know anything about consent, would you, Kaye? Because you certainly didn't have my consent to ambush me with this character assassination." The studio audience, which had been silent throughout the entire confrontation, began to murmur among themselves. Several people were actually booing now, and it wasn't directed at Tom Jones. It was aimed squarely at Kaye Adams and her despicable behavior. Tom looked directly into the main camera, speaking directly to the viewers at home. "To anyone watching this, I want you to remember what you've seen here today. This is what happens when television producers value sensationalism over integrity. This woman has disrespected not just me, but every guest who's ever trusted this show with their story." Security personnel had appeared at the edges of the set, though it was unclear whether they were there to protect Tom or to escort him out. Tom noticed them and chuckled grimly. "Don't worry, lads. I'm leaving on my own. I wouldn't want to spend another second in this toxic environment." He looked back at Kaye one final time, his expression a mixture of pity and contempt. "You know what, Kaye? I actually feel sorry for you. Imagine being so empty inside that the only way you can feel important is by trying to tear down people who've actually accomplished something with their lives." As Tom Jones strode toward the studio exit, the entire production fell into chaos. The other panelists were openly arguing with Kaye. The audience was in uproar, and production assistants were frantically trying to figure out how to salvage what was left of the show. Just before reaching the exit, Tom turned back one final time, his voice carrying across the entire studio. "Oh, and Kaye? My new album is called Surrounded by Time. It's about resilience, about surviving vultures like you, and it's bloody brilliant. Thanks for the free publicity." And with that, Sir Tom Jones walked out of the Loose Women studio, leaving behind the most explosive confrontation in the show's history. and a host whose career would never recover from the devastation she had brought upon herself. The cameras kept rolling as Kaye Adams sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that her cruel ambush had backfired spectacularly, turning her into the villain of her own show.